Motivation feels powerful. When it hits, you feel unstoppable, clear, certain, driven. You tell yourself, this is it. This is the moment everything changes. You set goals. You make plans. You imagine a different version of yourself. And for a short time, it feels real. Then it fades. Not because you're weak, not because you lack potential, but because motivation was never meant to last. That's the brutal truth. Motivation is emotional, and emotions fluctuate. They rise and fall depending on sleep, stress, environment, mood, and even weather. Yet most people build their entire life strategy around a feeling that is biologically unstable. They wait to feel inspired. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel confident. And while they wait, nothing changes. You don't struggle because you lack motivation. You struggle because you depend on it. Motivation is a spark. And sparks are temporary. They ignite quickly, they burn intensely, and then they disappear. If your progress depends on something that disappears, your progress will disappear with it. Think about your own life. How many times have you felt deeply motivated? After watching a video, after a failure, after a breakup, at the beginning of a new year, on a random night where everything suddenly felt clear. In those moments, you feel powerful, but possibility without structure collapses. Because motivation creates intention, it does not create systems. And systems are what build results. Here's something most people don't understand. High performers are not constantly motivated. They are constantly structured. They don't wake up asking, do I feel driven today? They wake up knowing what is scheduled. Their behavior is not dependent on emotion. It is dependent on design. When action is tied to mood, it becomes optional. When action is tied to structure, it becomes inevitable. Motivation says, I'll start when I feel ready. Discipline says, I start because it's time. That shift alone separates inconsistent people from consistent ones. Most people confuse intensity with progress. When motivation is high, everything feels urgent and dramatic. You feel like you're transforming. But intensity is not consistency. And consistency is what changes your identity. Motivation creates bursts. Consistency creates identity. Identity determines behavior. If you only act when motivated, you become someone who acts inconsistently. If you act regardless of mood, you become someone reliable. Reliability builds self-trust. Self-trust builds confidence. Confidence builds momentum. And momentum eventually feels like motivation. That's the irony. Real motivation is a byproduct of action, not the cause of it. You've been taught the opposite. You've been taught to wait for inspiration, to wait for clarity, to wait for confidence. But clarity is created by action. Confidence is built through repetition. Inspiration follows progress. The brutal truth is this: motivation is not rare. It's irrelevant. What's rare is structure. Structure means clear behaviors, defined time blocks, non-negotiable standards, reduced choices, predictable execution. Most people fail not because they lack desire, but because they lack structure. Everything feels flexible. Everything feels optional. Everything feels negotiable. And negotiable actions invite procrastination. You don't negotiate brushing your teeth. You don't negotiate showing up to work. Why? Because those decisions were made long ago. The debate is gone. Decision fatigue disappears when identity takes over. You don't need motivation to do what you identify with. You need motivation for things that conflict with your current identity. If you don't see yourself as disciplined, disciplined actions feel forced. If you don't see yourself as consistent, consistency feels unnatural. So you rely on emotional spikes to temporarily override your identity. But once the spike fades, you return to baseline. That's why motivation fails you. It does not rewire identity. It temporarily overrides it. Identity is rewired through repetition. Repetition requires structure. Structure requires commitment independent of mood. Your brain is designed to conserve energy. If every action requires an emotional debate, you will lose that debate because the brain prefers comfort. Comfort is predictable. Growth is uncertain. Motivation gives you the illusion of overcoming comfort, but without structure, comfort wins long term. You don't need more motivational content. You need friction removed from execution. Reduce decisions, pre-plan actions, schedule behaviors, make actions automatic. When behavior becomes automatic, emotion becomes irrelevant. And when emotion becomes irrelevant, consistency increases. Look at any area of your life where you're consistent. You're not constantly motivated there. You're simply conditioned. Conditioning beats motivation every time. The problem is most people are addicted to emotional intensity. Motivation feels good. It feels dramatic. It feels transformative. Structure feels boring. Repetition feels unexciting. But boring compounds. Excitement burns out. Success is usually built in boring seasons, in quiet repetition, in scheduled effort, in days that don't feel special. Motivation makes you feel like you're changing your life. Structure actually changes it. Here's another uncomfortable truth. If you constantly need motivation, you probably lack clarity, because clarity eliminates negotiation. When you know exactly what you're doing and when you're doing it, there's no emotional argument. Ambiguity creates hesitation. Hesitation invites delay. Delay erodes self-trust. And once self-trust erodes, you start labeling yourself lazy. But you're not lazy, you're structurally unprepared. You don't have a system that functions when you don't feel like it. That's why motivation becomes a crutch. It compensates for weak structure. But you don't build strength by leaning on crutches. You build strength by designing systems. This is exactly why I built the Motivation Blueprint. Because motivation isn't something you wait for, it's something you engineer. You design your environment. You reduce friction. You define identity-based habits. You remove emotional negotiation. You create automatic behavior. When you understand how to build systems instead of chasing feelings, consistency stops feeling impossible. Motivation becomes optional. Action becomes predictable. And predictable action builds predictable results. You don't need to feel unstoppable. You need to be structured. You don't need more hype. You need fewer decisions. You don't need emotional certainty. You need behavioral clarity. Motivation is temporary. Structure is permanent. Emotion is unstable. Systems are reliable. If you want stable results, you need stable behavior. And stable behavior is built in boring repetition, not emotional spikes. Stop waiting to feel ready. Start acting on schedule. Momentum will follow. Confidence will follow. And eventually, motivation will follow too. But this time, it won't control you. You'll control it. Built beyond comfort. Growth begins where comfort ends. Subscribe if you're ready for more uncomfortable truths.